All right. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who have been on a little bit
Excuse me, this is Dan Martin. Is the audio on?
I heard you.
I can hear you.
All right, Pat, you're free.
Okay. Hey, Dan, can you hear me?
It's on his end.
Dan?
It's on his, must be on his end.
Must be on his end. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the budget presentation for fiscal year 21. We're trying to give all community members as many opportunities as possible to become familiar with both the budgeting process and the budget that our treasurer, Bob Kohler, is in the process of finalizing and presenting to the board for adoption. I know that the board has not always done a public presentation of the budget, but this is something that Bob instituted a number of years ago, and I personally have found it very helpful. And we haven't talked about this, but I'm sure there will be questions. Bob indicated that after his presentation, there would be time for a question and answer period, and I think that's great. I am going to suggest that if you have a question that is going to involve an extensive answer, that perhaps you could submit it to Bob or to the foundation, and I'm sure Bob will provide a response and perhaps even post. We should have the ability to post those questions and answers on the website. So without wasting any more time, just wanted to say welcome and thank you very much for participating. I'm going to turn it over to our treasurer, Bob Kohler.
Well, thank you, Pat, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our little meeting to kind of give you a little tour of our proposed budget for fiscal 21. So, and before I do that, I would be remiss if we didn't wish our president a happy birthday, which was yesterday. So a belated happy birthday, Pat. So, 35 years old, I think.
35 and counting. Thank you so much.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Pat.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right, John, you want to move those slides for me? So here, I'll break my presentation down this morning into 4 topics, guys. First thing, I'll give you a little snapshot of where we are for the current year. And then we'll talk about the proposed operating budget for the upcoming fiscal year, as well as our proposed, a little too fast there, John, our proposed capital budget for the upcoming year. And then I'll also give you a little update on our replacement reserves. So, okay, now you can move it, John. That's okay. That's all right. So let me tell you where we are for the year. So we had budgeted a surplus for the year of about $10,600, and that would be after covering all of our expenses. And as you know, every month we move money over into our reserve fund. But for the 9 months ended March 31st, 2020, after making all of our scheduled transfers to the reserve fund, we're showing a surplus of about $117,000. So well in excess of what we budgeted. So why is that? Well, it didn't snow much, right? So we had a pretty significant savings on our snow removal budget of about $125,000. And I'll talk about that in detail in a few slides. So for the year ended June 30, I'm projecting that after we cover all of our expenses and move all of our money to the reserves, we should finish the year with about $100,000 surplus. Now, that's going to depend on how the fourth quarter expenses come out, but I think that's where we'll end up. We also have a capital budget. And our capital budget for the year was approximately $735,000. Guesstimating, we're probably going to come in at about $430,000, and that's because we have spent very little money on the Southridge Center project, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. I have a little typo there, I see. Our projected reserve balance, I'm estimating at the end of June 30, 2020, we should have about $2.1 million in our reserve fund, and that's going to take into consideration all of our current projects. But as many of you know, you've watched your investments or your 401k, it could be subject to some market changes. So, and I'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So you want to go to the next slide there, John?
That's the slide.
So how do we come up with this budget, right? Well, it's a process, as you might imagine. The foundation's bylaws do charge the treasurer with submitting a budget for board approval every year. That process starts in January and February when I start to try to pull together all the necessary information in order to put this budget together. And I'm ably assisted by Chris Nicholson in the foundation office, who is very, very helpful at pulling things together for me. I also meet with the executive director and the chairman of the maintenance committee and the maintenance supervisor to try to get a handle on what specific needs might we have. So that all gets incorporated into the budget. As you know, we have a finance committee, and the budget gets presented to the finance committee, and that took place on May 2nd. They had some requests for changes. Those got incorporated into the budget. And then on May 5th, this week, Tuesday night, I briefed the board. There was a budget workshop for them, so they got a first peek at the budget and asked some questions, etc. Today, we're doing our public meeting so that the homeowners can have some idea of what our spending plan is for the upcoming fiscal year. And then we're scheduled to, at next Friday night is our board meeting, and then that would be when we would traditionally approve that budget for the upcoming year. So what does the budget look like? So high level, right? Our projected revenue is about $2.5 million, and our projected expenses about $2.2 million, leaving us with an excess of around $359,000. Most of which will get moved over then to reserves because we budget for a certain amount, and this year's amount we'll see in a couple slides in the back, but we do have a reserve study that we follow that recommends how much we should put away, so that will leave us with a surplus, assuming everything goes according to plan exactly, right? It would leave us with a surplus of about $10,000, basically a break-even budget. So what are some of the key assumptions that go into that budget? Well, the starting point is always that we're going to maintain all of our existing amenities, right? I don't think we want to take any steps backward and abandon anything, right? So the budget assumes we're going to maintain all of our existing amenities and services. And the good news is, and this is usually one of the questions I always get, is will there be an assessment increase this year? And given current economic conditions, plus just after going through the budget process, I am recommending a 0 assessment increase in the new fiscal year. I do follow as much as possible a zero-based budgeting approach. So for you budgeting fans out there, that basically means we try to build the budget from the ground up, right? And for many of our categories, we're able to do that. For other categories, we look at historical patterns, trends. Some things are tied to contracts. So we try to follow all those things. And then on the capital side, we use that reserve study. So we have an independent organization that comes in every so many years and evaluates all of our property for us and gives us a recommended plan in terms of what to spend as well as what to fund. And then additionally, we've been able to, because we've been able to accumulate some funds, we've not only been able to handle just our reserve study projects, but we've been able to take on a number of other projects that just don't fit under the reserve study. And then lastly, as you know, we've recently approved a strategic long-range plan, and the budget is in support of the initiatives that are outlined in that plan. So as you might imagine, assessments are the principal source of revenue, and our budgeted assessments for the upcoming fiscal year work out to be $2.4 million, and that's 95% of our revenue. As a percentage, right, the other 5% comes from really, other minor categories, advertising, late fees, et cetera, and I'll show you a little bit more detail on that in a moment. But our budgeted revenue for fiscal 21 is actually a little bit less than what we budgeted for last year. So it's about $11,000, because I'm budgeting that we will probably see a decrease in our entrance fees, and those come from the one-time admission to the association when you buy a new house. So what's in that other income, that other 5%? So I just mentioned those entrance fees. So I'm budgeting about $25,000 for those, assuming 50 home sales in the upcoming fiscal year, and it's $500 whenever that happens. Existing homeowners are excluded from that. So if you are trading up, if you will, within the community, you're exempt from that. But new homeowners coming into the community do pay that one-time fee. And it has generated a nice source of revenue for us. It is consistent with what other HOAs do. We started this a couple of years ago, and it's been effective this year. We've raised almost $30,000 through that source last year when there were a lot of real estate sales, almost $39,000 last year. And then a couple other sources of other income. We do charge for advertising on our website and in our directory, and then also in late fees. And we had a couple of years where the late fees were significant, but we've done a good job of really bringing down the delinquencies, and I'm projecting, even in the current economic environment, that we should not see a big increase in our late fees. But that's the revenue side of the equation. So where does the money go? All right, so here's kind of a high-level summary of where we spend the money, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to touch on kind of those first 5 categories and give you a little bit more of the gory details of what comes in behind those numbers. So you can see that in rank order, right, the top place where we spend the most money is on our staff. That's 30% of our expenses. Taking care of the grounds, that's all the lawn mowing, the mulching, etc. That's about 20%. The snow removal is about 11%. Security, 8%. Utilities, 6%, and then professional fees. And those professional fees, that includes our legal fees, our accounting fees. We have some engineering costs, any collection matters for delinquent accounts, etc. So that totals, that's 80% of the budget right there in those 6 categories. And then the remainder, the remaining 20%, I'll show you a little slide that shows you what the composition of that is. So about a $2.2 million expense budget for the year. So before I kind of delve into those key areas, I thought it would be helpful to talk about, well, what are we doing to control expenses, right? I mean, I think that's a common concern of most people. So we do several things. We do get bids on almost everything. And typically anything we're going to spend over $1,000 on, we always try to get bids on. We're required by our own policies to get bids on anything over $5,000, but the staff has pretty much implemented this anytime it's over $1,000. We do monitor our expenses very carefully. I do get monthly reports on the budget. I go through these, I question them. I know that John and Brian do monitor this as well. And then we're constantly trying to evaluate, does it make sense to do things in-house versus outsourcing it? And I think we've had, especially in the snow plowing area, this has been one area that's been fairly effective for us. We've been able to save some money by utilizing in-house services versus outsourcing that completely. We have a very lean staff, right? There are 8 full-time people that work at the foundation, servicing 1,080, it's actually now 1,081, but servicing those 1,081 units. And we do monitor those contracts very carefully. Last year, there were a couple incidents with JML, and I requested that we get discounts from them because of the failure to perform, and we did receive some significant discounts from them as a result. We have been, over the last several years, very aggressively focused on preventive maintenance, right? Because in the long term, that certainly saves a lot of money, so we are trying to institute that throughout the property. And we've also found that using multi-year contracts has been very effective for us too. If we can enter into a 3-year contract for landscaping or snow removal, that's been a good way to control our costs. So all of those have been helpful. Okay, so let's look at some of the components, right? So the top category, right, 30% of our expenses is in the labor category. So what makes that up? Well, that's what we pay our staff. Those are the payroll taxes, as well as the benefits. Right, and those benefits are the health insurances, et cetera. So the current staff, we have 4 on the administrative side, 4 on the maintenance side. On the administrative side, that includes the executive director and then 3 office personnel. On the maintenance side, we have a maintenance supervisor and 3 maintenance technicians. We're not assuming in this budget any changes in staffing. The budget did increase this year for 2 reasons. One, in hiring a new executive director, one of the things we became aware of was that the salary rate for that position, we were under market conditions, let's put it that way, and we needed to bring that salary up. So that's been incorporated, and we've also baked in a 2% wage increase for the staff. The labor budget also includes staffing for the pools, which we'll talk about in a moment. So the pool budget does include staffing for lifeguards. There is a pool manager, and then staffing for our snack shack, which is a very popular little amenity that we do offer in conjunction with the pool. We staff the pools at all times that they are open with lifeguards, and that's due to legal opinions that we have received over the years, advising us that it would not be a good idea to open your pools without lifeguards. Now, I should say here and mention that, obviously in the current environment due to COVID-19, the board's decision right now is that the pools are closed until further notice. We will obviously be monitoring that very closely. You're probably hearing in a number of your communities where you are that your township managers, et cetera, are watching this too, because they're not sure what to do there as well. So I think we're going to kind of see this evolve over time. But for budgeting purposes, since that budget year begins on July 1, we do need to have a full year of costs in that budget. So that has been included. So let me just touch on benefits a little bit. So when you have employees, obviously you provide some benefits to them. And our benefits include health insurance. That's the primary piece of it. And that's about $72,000. And it's down a little bit comparison to last year's budget because we do have a few staff that aren't participating due to either personal choice or insurance coverage through a spouse. In the current fiscal year, and our increases typically come through in January, our health insurance increased by 4%. The finance committee debated this pretty significantly, and for budget purposes, we settled on 10% as our best guesstimate of what we think will happen with medical insurance, and we used 5% for all the other ones. Due to the COVID-19 and some of the significant costs hospitals have incurred, I'm just not sure what's going to happen here. So we'll be monitoring this very closely. Our current model is that the foundation pays 70% of the employees' health and other benefits, and the employees pay 30%. So we plan on continuing that. Okay, so our second category was grounds maintenance, and we do spend a lot of money on that. $421,000 being budgeted, and that's almost 20% of our budget. We did go through a process 2 years ago where we solicited bids, and we received, I want to say it was 3 or 4 bids if I remember correctly. We ended up choosing JML Landscaping, and there were a few issues last year. That was their first year on the mountain. I know that John and Brian, I think, have already had 1 and maybe 2 meetings with JML management to go over what some of the bumpy topics were last year. So hopefully that those can be addressed this year. This category is pretty all-encompassing, right? It includes all the basic things you would think of, right? Grass cutting, fertilization, mulching, stump removal, tree trimming, etc. It also includes those things that we do on kind of a seasonal basis, where you'll see the hanging baskets, the wreaths, etc. Also included in this category, and Dennis, you'll appreciate this, one of the initiatives in the strategic plan was to begin to look at do some work on the trees in the community. So some money has been included to do some study of the trees, to figure out what our next steps might be there. There is also a fairly significant category, I think it's $27,500 for tree trimming and pruning, right? So this will help us to reinvest in the community in accordance with the strategic plan. Snow removal, difficult to estimate. So let me give you a little background on this. So what we've put in the budget for this year, $250,000, a slight decrease from last year's budget, which was $260,000. Still, it's a significant component of the budget at 11%. It is very hard to predict, right? As you might imagine. We just never know what the snowfall is going to be. If it snows a lot, we spend a lot, right? If it doesn't snow a lot, we're all disappointed because we can't ski, but we win on the budget side, right? So it actually is a savings for us. And that's what happened this year. So our actual expense through fiscal 20 was $134,000 versus a budget of $260,000. So we're showing a favorable variance, and that's what's going to generate that surplus for us this year, which is going to help us because we're going to move that over into our reserves, which is going to help us with those projects that are outlined in the reserve study and those additional projects we need to take on. So what's that budget made up of? Well, we budget for plowing. That's what we pay the outside vendor. And a significant part of that budget is for shoveling. You would be amazed at the number of hours that are spent shoveling because we have a policy that says when we get over 6 inches of snow at the townhouses and the condominiums, we are shoveling sidewalks and steps. And we do that for safety reasons, of course. It costs a lot of money to do that. We also, our salt budget, $130,000. We typically utilize anywhere between 1,500 and 1,700 tons of salt per year. In 2020, our contract price was $88.30 a ton. Due to the mild winter, I think we will see that come down a little bit. It has ranged anywhere between $80 a ton, and this is a high, this $88.30 a ton. So I think we'll probably see it shake out at around $85 a ton in fiscal 21. And then we also purchased some anti-skid material to help when we have icy conditions. So here's a snapshot for you. Now I must confess that the 6/30/20 number is off by approximately an inch because it snowed at Hidden Valley yesterday, right? There was an extra inch of snow yesterday. So the actual total there should be something like 82.8 inches and 49 snow days. But this gives you an idea of how hard it is to predict this, right? So if you kind of look at the numbers, you can see it varies from year to year in terms of inches and snow days and our expenses. And you know, you try to look for patterns here. And the one pattern that you could kind of see emerging is when you look at 16, 17, and 18, okay, the snow days are increasing, the snowfall increased, the expense increased. Well, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. Then you look at 6/30/19 and you say, well, what the heck happened, right? We had less snowfall, we had less snow days, but we spent more money. So you have to kind of dig into the details, and our resident meteorologist at Hidden Valley, John Cups, would tell you that in 6/30/19, even though we had less snow days, we had more ice events, right? Which we used a tremendous amount of salt last year. We actually got near the end of the season, there was a salt shortage, and we were really rationing our salt supply to get through the rest of the year. So you get somewhat of an idea of why it is difficult to predict this. Obviously, we love it when we get a lot of snow, but we're going to have to wait and see what happens. Okay. Security, as you know, we do have 24/7 security coverage throughout the community. We have that provided by Allied Universal. The budget I've put in for fiscal 21 is $171,000. That's approximately a 2.5% increase from our current year. Our contract is up this year, so we will be looking at that probably in July sometime. We will start to review that and look at our bidding process, et cetera. And we do get a number of things with that, including the security vehicle. There are touch points throughout the community. There's GPS on the vehicle. The board gets monthly reports on the types of security incidents that have occurred during the month. And in our homeowner surveys, security is rated as one of the most important things to homeowners. So this is certainly an amenity that we want to try to continue. Utilities. So this incorporates a number of things, right? Trash removal, recycling, electricity, water and sewage, natural gas, etc. So the overall budget for the community, about $134,000. Almost half of that, right, is for trash removal. We do have a 5-year contract, which does allow for some vendor increases. We did get hit with a 4% increase last year. I suspect probably in the beginning of the fall, we'll probably get hit with another 4% increase. So I've tried to anticipate that. We also, several years ago, in response to homeowner requests, we started recycling, right? We get charged per pickup. And right now we have pickups twice a month. We get charged $322 every time they come and pick it up. I did include in the budget an increase in the recycling. And the reason I did that was we're seeing more volume at the recycling center. And so for the summer season, so between Memorial Day and Labor Day, we would anticipate going to weekly pickups and then during ski season as well. However, having said that, the board has been discussing this over the last couple of weeks. We have noticed some significant issues with recycling. There is a significant amount of non-recyclable materials that are being dropped off in our recycling drop-off center. We have seen tires. There have been construction materials. I got a picture of a toilet that was left next to the recycling dumpster. So while this is an amenity that we certainly believe in and that the homeowners have told us is important, we seem to be seeing some abuses of this. So the board is going to monitor this very closely for the next 60 to 90 days and if we don't see an improvement in compliance here, this might be an area that we will have to revisit. So we don't want to do that. So my message to those of you on the call today would be to please spread the word to your fellow homeowners to be a little bit more diligent in what you drop off at the recycling center. Clearly posted what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. We want to be a green community. We want to continue to do this, but it's getting more and more difficult to manage it. So. The one other thing I'd like to touch on here is just, and always kind of amazes me what we spend on this, but it is a valid cost. We have a number of lamp posts throughout the community, a little over 600, if I remember correctly, and it costs us about $39,000 a year to light those lamp posts throughout the year. So that's something that we do budget for as well. So that other category, remember my summary slide, right? We talked about the 6 items that meet the 80%, and then here's the other 20%, right? So what goes in there? Well, as you know, we use a management company to manage the property. And for the upcoming year, our president was able to negotiate a good contract for a 1-year extension with First Service. So last year, about $75,500 was the budget amount. This year coming up, fiscal year, be $64,000. The board is also evaluating whether to continue with First Service and or to move to some form of self-management. And I think right now the board sentiment is more towards moving towards some type of self-management because we've been very dissatisfied with the type of service we've received from First Service. Insurance is another area that you might imagine where we spend an amount of money, $55,000. And there's really 2 things in that category. One is the property and casualty, our general liability coverages, et cetera. And the other piece of it is workman's comp, right? Because we have administrative people, maintenance people, and lifeguards. And in those 3 categories, there are different rates assigned to each type of employee. So that makes up our insurance expense. We also then have some office expenses, as you might imagine, just miscellaneous. I've listed a couple of them there. We do have a fleet of vehicles. We own 4 trucks. We have a front end loader. We have an excavator. We have, I'm missing one, we have a machine called a Steiner, thank you, that we use for snow removal on the walking paths. So we have to maintain that equipment. We have a number of activities the social and recreation committees activate for us throughout the year. And then we also have a shuttle service that we pay for to transport our folks on the mountain down to the resort during ski season. I've pointed out to the board that that is a very expensive amenity and that it's something that we will need to look at. Finance committee has recommended that we get some bids. To just make sure that the resort is giving us a fair deal on that. And we probably also need to just revisit the hours of service. And then lastly, you know, the catch-all category consists of any bad debt expense we might have, the depreciation on our equipment. We do make an annual contribution of $10,000 to the Bakersville Volunteer Fire Department. They are our first responder in the event of an incident. And then supplies and just facilities maintenance. Okay. So guys, I'm going to pause here for a moment. That's the operating budget, right? So when you think of operating budget, think of the day-to-day operations, right? So maybe before I move into reserves and the capital budget, this might be a good place to pause to see if there are any general questions.
If people can raise their hand, that would help us be able to switch to the view if there are any questions.
Thank you, John. So I see one question here. Can you speak to the likely impact of self-management on insurance costs? Sure. So I think what we will see if we switch to self-management, I can tell you for sure, one change will be we will see a reduction in our health insurance costs. The First Service program is very expensive in terms of health insurance, and we received some preliminary numbers where we think we would save probably between $10,000 and $15,000 a year on health insurance. I don't think we would see any other changes in our property and casualty or liability coverages. I think those would stay consistent, as would our workman's comp.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, Pat.
What if you go back to the last slide, in that last category of other,
Yes.
what percentage of that number is for bad debt?
It's $10,000. So not much at all. Yeah.
So that's a pretty small amount.
Yeah, that's a small, kind of the big piece of that is the depreciation. It usually runs $35,000 to $40,000 a year. So it's one of the bigger pieces of it. So.
Okay.
Let's see, I think I saw another question. Camera on the recycling dumpster. That has been discussed. That was actually a recommendation of one of the folks at our finance committee meeting. So, I mean, that is something that we have thought about. So.
Hey, Bob, this is Howard Bitzer.
Hey, Howard.
Hi. Hey, I just have a question going back to some of the labor expenses and the overall expenses that you're planning on. And we all know that snow is pretty unpredictable, and we've enjoyed a few surpluses the last couple of years. But based upon what's going on right now, I know you have line items in there for pool labor, which is a pretty big item, and activities, which if you subtract out the shuttle, which really doesn't come into play until the end of the year, the social and rec is probably going to be stifled a bit this year, maybe quite a bit. Knowing that those items are controllable in that we know that we won't be paying them, is the Finance Committee and you as the treasurer considering either reducing the homeowner assessment, maybe a one-time, 1 month amount for those activities, or are you planning on just keeping that surplus and putting it into the foundation reserves?
That's an excellent question, Howard. Thank you. So my response to that would be that, well, we would budget a full year of activities, right? Just try to be as normal as we possibly can. Obviously, we will probably see some savings from some activities that don't take place. And our consistent policy here has always been anytime that we have a surplus, we always use that and place it into our reserves. And I would recommend continuing that practice. And let me give you a couple examples, Howard, that might help put this in perspective too. In 2015, we had the Pines Pond sprang a leak and it literally drained down to the ground. So, you know, nothing that we could budget for, right? That was a $42,000 repair. We had to put in a whole new clay pond liner in order to restore that pond to its activities. If I go back to 2010, when we actually had, and I'm going to be off by an inch or two, so forgive me here, we had 215 inches of snow. We spent $735,000 on snow removal that year. The good news is we had funds in the bank. We did not have to borrow any money. We did not have to incur any kind of a special assessment. We were able to pay for that. It was devastating. I mean, we were not able to put any money into our reserves as scheduled that year, but we were able to get through it. So while this is somewhat of an unusual time, we've put into the budget for no assessment increase, trying to respond to that. But I think we still have to have a budget that is reflective of normal operations. And if we're successful and if we have a surplus this year, that creates more funds that are available to tackle some of our projects. In addition to our reserve study expenditures, Howard, we have more non-reserve study expenditures than we do have reserve study expenses. There are a number of deferred maintenance projects that we inherited from the original developer that we've tackled over the years, and we will continue to tackle. The reserve study estimates that we need $16.2 million over the next 40 years to take care of just the assets listed in the reserve study. So by keeping our assessments level, even during a challenging time like this, I think will enable us to take care of the community long term. Now, having said that, if we have a homeowner, an individual homeowner that comes to us and says, hey, we're struggling, right? With both husband and spouse are laid off, are facing financial difficulty. We're certainly sensitive to that, right? And there are things that we can do to respond to that. We don't have to be draconian, right? We realize that this could be a challenging time for people, so we can work with them. I monitor those delinquencies every week. So far, we've had one call from a homeowner out of 1,080 units asking us for a little bit of help, and certainly we're going to do that. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, Howard, but I hope that helps.
Well, it does, Bob, and I understand where the foundation is coming from. It's just that, and of course, being a board member with the Highlands Condo Association, our assessment fees not only fund the foundation
Right.
Amenities and reserves, but it also has to fund its own billings and reserves.
Right.
And what I'm looking at as the treasurer is a known line item in the foundation, which normally would be spent, wouldn't be a surplus at the end of the year, but this year there's a pretty good chance it is going to be a surplus. And it just appears that the foundation is kind of like, saying, hey, great, we got an extra, $90,000 going to be coming in at the end of the year that we can apply to a ditch or something. When in fact, our share of that at the Highlands, I would much rather have the $12,000, $13,000 of that $90,000 go into the Highland reserves.
Right.
And that would actually pay for half of a roof, which is one of our expenditures that we're going through right now. So I understand where you're coming from, not wanting to have special assessments for drainage ditches or a pond, but I don't want to have special assessments on my 144 units to put on a roof when there's $12,000 that could be in our reserves. It's still going to be paid by the members, but it's in our reserves rather than yours, because once it's in yours, I can't get it back. But if it's in mine, I can use it. That's where I'm coming from.
I can appreciate that, Howard. And it's not yours versus mine, right? The foundation reserves are our reserves, right? It's for the benefit of the whole
I know that,
community.
Bob. I mean, you cut our grass and everything, but we pay for that. I mean, we pay $303,000 a year to you guys.
Yep,
So,
yep, I understand that. So,
and
Howard, maybe
looking at. That's all. Well, we can take this offline. But,
yeah,
I just wanted to know if there was any consideration down the line for this. That's all.
I mean, obviously, Howard, we will continue to monitor this, I mean, as much as we possibly can. So, and I think our budget assumes a year of normalcy as much as that is humanly possible, right? So, and right now, there are just so many unknowns. So in order to put together a good budget, I have to assume, right, a year of normal operations. Obviously, that could change, right? And then, we can look at things. I know that a couple years ago, the foundation did pay for a reserve study for all of the condominium associations. So I assume that your organization, the Highlands, is probably following that, right? And you're putting money away into your reserves so that you're able to do things. So, and those are practices that the foundation will continue to do, right? We will continue to pay for those types of things to help the individual associations. In addition to that, we did not raise the service fees from the foundation to the condominium associations. Those have been at $6 a unit, I think, for as long as I've been the treasurer. So, we're trying to be understanding of the current economic situation and help out the sub-associations as much as we can. So, but thanks for your question. Good question. So,
hey, Bob, Tom has raised his hand for a question. Tom, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hey, one of the biggest complaints that I hear throughout the course of the year, actually two of the biggest complaints recently, were the service from the shuttle on certain weekends, certain days. And then when we went to the new JML landscaping people, they're, a year or so ago, what they had done was less than what was contracted. So my question, not so much in the budget, but in the negotiations, is there a way to recoup some of our funds when they don't do what they do or what they're supposed to do? and again, the complaints are, there wasn't, a certain weekend, there wasn't enough shuttle service. It was going here, it was going there, it wasn't where it was supposed to be. And I get it that while whatever funds are able to be recouped might be minimal in terms of the budget, the percentages, maybe that would enhance the service if they realize, hey, if we don't do what we're supposed to do, we're going to have to give back some money. Because what we've gotten so far was, hey, an apology and we'll do better. And maybe they did do better, but when you give back some money, it kind of appeases the masses. And if anything, maybe there wouldn't be as many complaints, and mostly there would be better service moving forward. Is there anything that's able to be done like that, or has consideration been given to that?
Yeah, Tom, that's a great point, and I can speak to that, and then maybe I can ask John Sabo to add to it. On the shuttle side, there was a weekend that I was familiar with where I got an email message regarding the failure of the resort to provide shuttle service. So we did lean on them and got them to adjust their bill. They did reduce it for a whole day service. And as I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're kind of looking at that shuttle because it's an expensive amenity. We want to make sure that we are getting our value for it. So thank you for bringing that up. On the JML side, we did have service issues last year, and they missed a number of lawn mowings. They missed a number of deadlines in the contract as to when certain things were due. And I did go back to them and we insisted on discounts from them. And I want to say the total discounts totaled about $20,000. We used those funds in some other areas, right? We were able to do some other work on the mountain that we would not have been able to do based on those savings. So we are trying to hold them accountable, Tom, on that. And John Sabo, maybe I could ask you to comment on, I know you've had 1 or 2 preliminary meetings with JML. Do you want to talk about, I know you guys have structured some penalties, right, if they don't meet certain deadlines this year?
No, thank you, Bob. Yeah, hearing the complaints, and Brian and I had meetings with the regional president and operations manager of JML. It was a very productive discussion, and to Tom's point exactly, we and basically insisted on a liquidated damage charge per each missed milestone. And with some heavy pressure, JML agreed to allow me to be the arbiter of that, which gives us the leverage we need to enforce that. And it is down to the edging of the mulch beds all the way up to cutting. And the liquidated damages are cost plus, so it's not meant to derive revenue. But however, it is a good motivator that if they miss a mowing, it's the cost of the mowing plus an additional 10%, which is about $5,300. So it's a painful, to give them credit. They have instituted process changes. We've instituted process changes, which mean physical inspection of each milestone. And Brian and his team report to me in the form of a punch list. So we're finding the promises that they've made to be kept. We're going to keep the board updated on those issues. And we were happy to see JML get ahead of the curve this year. They have addressed their labor issues. Last year, they got caught in a problem with HV1 visa holders not being admitted. This year, we insisted on them hiring more local folks, not for any other reason, but to make sure we have the staff necessary to perform the objectives that we're paying for.
Thank you, John. Tom, hopefully that addresses your question.
Yeah, that does. You guys are on top of it. I did not know that. That's good. Hey, and I personally haven't had any complaints, but it saddens me when I see lots of complaints.
Right.
And you know where I see them. But, it just looks, it's a bad look. And again, you guys are really on top of it. Not that I didn't think you would be. That's wonderful. But maybe, I don't know if it'd be appropriate or not, put something out there. Hey, they reimbursed us $5,300. And again, to John's point, it's not about raising the revenue, but if it enhances the service, move it on. And if it appeases people to know, hey, we didn't pay for it. Yeah, we didn't get the service we wanted, but we also didn't pay for it. Maybe that would soften some of the blow. That's all.
Thank you, Tom. Dave Fiola, our communications czar, is sitting in there today. So Dave, make some notes there. These are some things we could share with the homeowners. So.
No,
that's a really good point. As we approach maybe more of a presence of JML and the weather, it looks at least in a week we should actually have quote unquote normal weather. I expect to see JML even have a bigger presence on the mountain, and that's something that Maddie and I can work on in the weekly update, Tom. So we will find a home for that on the website, and we will link to it.
You want to try yours on this Bluetooth? Go ahead.
In next Wednesday's update, so that people can see, and again, to your point, Tom, understanding and I don't know if admitting isn't really the right word, but just acknowledging that there were some shortcomings last year. We've moved to, we understand those, we're aware of those, we've moved to resolve those going forward, and we have a plan in place. So to your point, I think that's what people really want to see.
Thank you, Dave. Okay, so why don't we switch gears then and kind of move over to the capital budget, right? So let me make a distinction between the operating budget and the capital budget. So we said the operating budget, kind of the day-to-day operations, right? Paying the routine bills of running the foundation. The capital budget looks at more long-term items, right? So if we have to replace a roof, right? If we have to replace the swimming pool, if we have to pave roads, right? Those fall under our capital budget. So we kind of loosely refer to these as reserves. If you look at our audited financial statements, you'll see them tagged as the replacement reserve fund. So we use an outside firm that performs a reserve study, and they come in and look at all of the assets throughout the community. And I was looking at it the other day as I was working on the budget. They've identified 314 different items throughout the community that we need to take care of, right? So they incorporate that in their overall assessment. They recommend for fiscal 21 that we put $428,000 into our reserve fund. The budget shows us putting in $325,000 because we're able to then also, I'm projecting our surplus of $100,000 this year. So that'll get us to where we need to be for fiscal 21's funding of the reserves. Our reserves do earn some earnings from investment income, dividends, and interest, and I'm estimating that to be $23.5 net of our expenses. And it's not considered a best practice to estimate appreciation in your investments, and you can imagine why, right? At the end of 2019, the investments were doing very well. We got into January and February doing very well, and then March hit and COVID-19, et cetera. The value of our investments declined. So it's not wise to try to estimate appreciation when looking at your reserve funds. Those reserves are really critical. You've heard me talk about this at the annual meetings, and they're critical for a number of reasons, right? If we want to make sure that we can continue to sell homes at Hidden Valley, about 75% of our home sales are based on mortgage financing, and most of the time those banks ask for copies of our financial statements so they can see that the community is well funded. We use those reserves to maintain all of our assets, our pools, roads, light poles, buildings, trucks, etc. And because we have been good stewards of our financial resources, we've had some years of surpluses, we've followed the reserve study, we've been able to actually take on some additional projects. So not just what's in the reserve study, but some other issues.
Trying to get it to link to.
So you want to go to the next slide, John? Thank you. So the bylaws require us to do an updated reserve study every 5 years. So the next scheduled one will be in fiscal 22. So probably sometime in March, April of 22, we will have an independent company come out and perform that reserve study. As part of putting this year's budget together, I did review with the finance committee and the board a projection, what I see happening over the next 4 years up through fiscal 24. And the projection shows, and it's going to depend on what the Southridge Center project costs us, but the projection shows we could be anywhere between $2.1 million and $2.5 million in total expenses. So that's a lot, right? And you can see that the amount that we're projecting to spend is going to exceed what we're going to put into that fund. So we're going to start to draw down our replacement fund, right? Which is okay, right? Because we have built those funds up. They're there for a reason. We're going to start to utilize them and draw them down. So what are we going to do this year, right? Fiscal 21. So We'll stay on track with our road program that's recommended by the reserve study. We've got some fencing to do at the Southridge Center. We need to replace some timber retaining walls. I think those are over at Eagles Ridge, if I remember correctly. So from the reserve study, that's going to cost us $152,000 and change. But we have some other projects. So these are things that are not contemplated by the reserve study. And if we did not have funds available, we would probably be looking at special assessments or some other way to pay for these. So Imperial Road, we have undertaken a major drainage project down there. The first part of that is currently underway, or soon will be, as soon as the weather breaks and contractors are able to work. The second phase is going to be more costly. We have some serious issues with erosion over there and drainage, so this will put in the necessary catch basins, culverts, etc., and allow this water to be drained off the property without doing further damage to our property owners. You'll see a line item there that says Gardner Road Lot Project. So what is that? Well, you may be aware that we currently have a salt dome that is located on Gardner Road. That is not on our property. That sits on resort property, and the resort leases that to us for $1 a year. We think that it is likely in probably the next year or two that the resort will tell us that they probably want that property for themselves. So we're trying to plan for that. We were fortunate to find, it's about a 1.5 acre parcel on Gardner Road. It's located on the left side as you're going down towards Bakersville. It's past the existing salt dome. But it would give us sufficient property to be able to relocate our salt dome there. That property is 100% wooded. I've walked it along with Brian, our maintenance director, so that I could check it out before we bought it. I know Doug Henley has walked it, inspected it also. It's going to take some work to grade that property so that we will be able to put our salt dome on there. So in fiscal 21, I'm estimating $80,000 to do two things. One, we would get an engineer to give us a site plan. How would we locate things there? And then we need to cut a road in, right, and begin to do some of the leveling work that we can set the property up. So that's what the $80,000 is for. And then there are a couple of miscellaneous projects of $37,000. Now you'll notice Southridge Center has a question mark right next to it. So the items that we can identify the cost for, about $400,000, but Southridge Center has a question mark. So I want to take you through some information on that and kind of bring you up to date as to where we are with the Southridge Center project. So John, if you want to move it. So you've heard us talk about this now for probably at least 2 years. We had some initial drawings done. We did some surveys. We've mentioned this at the annual meeting. It's mentioned at numerous board meetings. But the reason we need to do something at the Southridge Center is really twofold. Our snack shack, which is a very popular little amenity, does not meet state regulations for a food facility. And secondly, we currently do not have any rinse showers for the pools, which is also a state guideline that folks who are using the pools, you're supposed to rinse before you actually get into the pool, and we currently do not have that available. So this project will enable us to do that, as well as to, one of the things that was contemplated in the original plans were to add some storage. So the board approved a budget for fiscal 20, this fiscal year, of $250,000 to complete that project. And we did engage an engineering firm, EADS. You've maybe heard of them before. They've done some work for the foundation over the years. And they designed it, right? So they designed to retrofit the existing snack shack, add some outdoor bathrooms and showers, and add some much needed storage space in the current area where the snack shack is now. At our request, EADS handled all the bidding. All right, so they sent out proposals to 6 firms, and we did receive 3 responses. I want you to take a look at those prices, right? The bids that came in, $409,000, $398,600, and $329,450. Way above, right, what we had put in our budget. We went back to the low bidder, right, and we asked them, okay, can you sharpen up the pencil, right? Take another look at that bid. They did bring it back to us at $310, right? And still the entire board, right, felt that maybe it's time we need to revisit this entire project, okay, and look at all the different aspects and elements of it. So that was in the fall, right, because I briefed everybody at the annual meeting on that in November. So we started the process of looking at this, right? And at the February board meeting, you might recall, Bill Leisha did a presentation where we talked about kind of a revised concept. So it would relocate this South Reg Center addition, and it would move it over to where we kind of call the kiddie pool or the baby pool, right? And we would relocate the snack shack there, add some bathrooms and the necessary rinse showers. And we think we would also be able to add some much needed gathering space and some storage. And kudos to my fellow board member, Bill Leisha, who also, in going through this process, he identified a company called Morton Builders, who does a number of these types of buildings. They, I think, if I remember correctly from their presentation, they're the #1 church builder in the country. They build all kinds of commercial buildings, office buildings, storage buildings, rec centers, etc. So we did sign a contract with them to ask them to provide us with some detailed plans and drawings, right? Because we need to have some idea of what the total cost of this is going to be. Those drawings, once we get them, will enable us to put out for bid all the components of the building, right? The plumbing, the HVAC, the electrical work, etc. Morton would build the shell, right, and install a complete shell for us that we can then finish. And then the board would be able to make a final decision on once all those costs are known. So, and if you want to take a look at it, they really have some very impressive structures. You could look at their website, which is mortonbuildings.com. And there are also a couple of locations locally. And I wrote down, Bill had mentioned to the board members, the Laurelville Christian Camp is an example of a Morton building that's a local facility. So if you wanted to try to take a look at that. So just to kind of put this in perspective, when my wife and I first purchased our property at Hidden Valley, I think in 2007, about a year after we bought it, the then board was contemplating doing something to the foundation building. The cost at that time was $850,000. And the board at that time, of course, stopped the project, did not move forward with it, et cetera, because there was no money to pay for it. They would have to take out financing, et cetera. So what is being proposed here is to literally just solve some of our compliance issues, provide us with a little bit of additional gathering space, something that would look nice. We do get the question sometimes about, well, why don't you just build onto the existing building? And there are reasons for that. And the primary reason is that if we do something major to the existing building, we would have to make some major upgrades to bring that building into compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it's very costly to do that. So by keeping this structure separate, right, it enables us to achieve our objectives, right, and kind of keep the costs a little bit more under control. So that's kind of the unknown right now in the capital budget. So the board will be monitoring this very closely until we get some additional information on it. Okay. So let me kind of summarize where we are on the capital side. The projection, as I mentioned earlier, at June 30, we should have about $2,168,000 in our replacement reserve fund. We do invest those funds in accordance with a board-approved investment policy. The Finance Committee meets regularly with our investment managers, usually 2 to 3 times a year. We don't manage it. We're not the ones making those decisions. We have 2 great managers, Gaia Suda Investments and Somerset Trust. We had met with them in February. They reviewed how they had performed for us. And in 19, they both had phenomenal years, did a really good job for us. And I think the proof of our investment policy and what the investment managers have done for us is that when the markets really decreased significantly in March, we didn't take such a big hit, right? The markets went down significantly. We didn't take that big hit. I get reports from them. I'm monitoring it now every 2 weeks. And at the end of April, if you look at the total market value of our investments compared to the cost, we're at 105%. So what that means is that our market value is still above what we paid for our investments. And those investments are still generating interest and dividend income. So I think our policy seems to be working and our investment managers seem to be doing a good job for us. So I guess I would summarize by saying that through a lot of years of planning and fiscal discipline and following that reserve study, that has really helped our community. We've been able to fund not only the projects that are in the reserve study, but we've been able to take on additional projects. You hear drainage mentioned a lot because we have a lot of significant drainage issues around the community, and those drainage issues impact our roads. So by addressing those drainage issues, we can also help increase the longevity of our roads. And I will post after this meeting today, if you're interested, the proposed detailed budget, all 15 pages of it in Excel. It's fascinating reading if you're interested. And we'll also post these slides as well. So I will stop there and see if any other questions have come up since our previous little question and answer session. So thank you.
Hey, thanks, Bob. But real quick, John Sabo, I've gotten a text from some people who I think have questions, but they're having trouble getting in and have requested to be unmuted.
Screen sharing. There we go.
Oh, wow, got a lot of folks.
Rick Williams.
Can you hear us?
Yes, this is Rick Williams. I had submitted a question during chat, but apparently you guys didn't pick up on it. I had two questions. The first question is, what exactly does the management company do? What services do they perform? And then the second question, and I realize 2% is not much, but what was the rationale of considering a raise in this economy where I gotta believe most companies, institutions, places will be looking at no raises this year, and in fact, probably in a lot of cases, probably pay cuts. Thank you.
Those are good questions, Rick. So let me see if I can answer those. So I'll kind of take them in reverse order. So in terms of the pay raises, the 2% was just considered as kind of a very low increase for the staff. And we've done that primarily to just help them with what we believe will be a very significant increase in health insurance. Remember from my previous slide that the employees bear 30% of the cost of their health insurance. So hopefully the little 2% increase will help them at least absorb the increase that they're most likely going to get in their health insurance. So at least economically, they probably won't be harmed and probably be at least in the same place and not lose any ground economically. We're getting a little bit of feedback there, Pat.
Rick, that is an excellent question, but it's probably also an excellent time for everybody to understand that we spent months without an executive director in the last year, and the staff has all had to step up and frankly take on more than they otherwise would do. And so the point of that 2% is to recognize in small part their effort and their
Hold on, Pat.
Pat, yeah, I'm trying to find out whose phone is. All right, Pat, you're back on.
Did you guys hear what I said?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So Bob, why don't you respond to the second part?
All right, let me unmute Bob. Hold on a second. Stand by, Bob. There you go.
Okay, thank you. So Rick, your second question was about the management company and what they do for us. So they do a number of things for us. They provide all of the billing service. So they send out all the assessment notices to our homeowners. They are the accounts payable function. So the bills come here to the foundation office. They're approved here, coded here. They're sent to First Service. First Service processes them for payment, sends us the checks. We sign them and send them out. First Service provides all of the financial statements. So for each of our 5 legal entities, which includes the foundation and 4 sub-associations, they produce all of the financial statements and the financial records. They provide the work order system. So if a homeowner calls in and needs something done, it's logged into the work order system. They provide all the HR services, right? So the staff at the foundation are not employees of the foundation. They are actually employees of First Service. We reimburse First Service for their payroll costs, payroll taxes, insurances, etc. But First Service, they work for First Service. They're subject to all of First Service's policies and procedures, etc. So that's what goes into the fee provided by First Service.
And I just want to add to that, as you can tell based on what Bob has said, there are a number of pieces that the foundation will need to put together in order to replace any management company.
Right.
I don't think we disagree that we can probably do a better job by putting a number of pieces together on our own, because we don't get a great deal of assistance from First Service. I will say in the new contract going forward, we have saved some money, and the contract does contain a 90-day out. If we're able to, and we've been working on putting the pieces together for the last couple of months, if we're able to complete that process so that we're all comfortable with moving forward, we have the ability to terminate that contract prior to June 30th. And so obviously we've got a number of significant projects on the list, but this is not insignificant. This is a very important part of what we're going to be doing the next couple of months. So I'm not sure where that, I think that was Rick who asked the question. It's an excellent question, and one we've been wrestling with since January. Any other questions?
Rick.
Hold on a second, Rick. I'll unmute you. All right, you're on, Rick.
All right, not so much a question, but just a reinforcement for those on the call, and I think it's mostly preaching to the choir, but we've talked a lot in the last 6 months about the future of Hidden Valley as a community, the value, and based on the dedicated volunteers and a handful of volunteers that help us. And I just want to reinforce, there is no one more exemplary than Bob and what he does for us in our community and taking care of this. For those of you who are cost conscious, if we had others or we had to hire others to do this for us, it would be a significant cost for us. So Bob, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Rick. Very kind of you.
Hi, this is Helene. I just wanted to say that that was an excellent presentation. It was just very engaging, very informative, and we've had a house at Hidden Valley for 30 years, and I have never been able to attend any of these meetings. So of all the horrible things that have come out of this pandemic, I think that one fantastic thing is that Zoom meetings have allowed people to engage more, and so I'm extremely grateful. So thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Helene, for your comments. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. Thank you.
Yes.
Anyone else? Okay. Bob, anything else?
No, I want to just thank everyone for participating today. Thank you for your great questions. As you can probably tell, I enjoy talking about this stuff. So please email me or call me at any time. I'm happy to chat about it. And as I mentioned, we will post after this session, the slides will be posted, and I will post that detailed budget for the operations too. So if you're interested and kind of want to see where all the pennies go, you can come through all 15 pages of it. And we have a very detailed, what's referred to in accounting as a chart of accounts. So we track our spending very carefully. We can tell you, for example, exactly what we spend per truck. We know exactly what we spend on salt, etc. So I'll make sure that that's posted immediately following this meeting. So thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Just one more thing, guys. Rick kind of stole my thunder, but I do want to emphasize that not only does Bob work very hard on this, and I guess, you know, we all enjoy what we do, but it doesn't mean that if we had to go out in the marketplace for this, it would be very expensive. And So, you know, Bob, on behalf of the board and the community, I just want to add to what Rick is saying that, you know, we truly appreciate everything you do. And again, if there are any questions with regard to Bob's information, more information will be posted online, and Bob, I'm sure, will be happy to answer any.
Absolutely. So thank you, Pat, very much.
Okay, and thanks to everyone for participating.
Excuse me, do you have time for one more question?
Sure, Dan.
It's not related to budget, but does anybody know what's going on with the pond over by the summit?
Oh, John Sabo, I think you're able
Yeah.
to speak to that, right?
Yeah.
I can. I want to appreciate the resident who brought it to our attention the other day, and what appeared to be parasitical worms. We ended up consulting with the regional herpetologist, which is an amphibian biologist. Unfortunately, somehow the tadpoles and frogs got into the pump housing. So as they got pushed out of the pump housing, what you saw was their intestines, part of their liver, and their swim bladder, which is a surprise because looking at history, we've never seen that. The screening has worked. So we're working with the herpetologist and the pond vendor to try to find a screening that would not guarantee the pump burning out, but will hopefully prevent amphibians from finding their way in. But we did have the herpetologist, which is the regional gal from the Pennsylvania Conservation and Environmental Department, confirm that it was unfortunately traumatic injury due to the pump.
Wow. Are they a parasite, or what exactly is happening?
No, the tadpoles got sucked into the waterfall pump. And as they got expelled from the waterfall pump, the pressure change forced their intestines from their body. So there is no parasites, there's no disease, and that was confirmed by the herpetologist.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for your question, Dan, and it's such an unfortunate incident. We will definitely follow up with the idea that we don't want it to happen again.
Yeah, I was just concerned. There's a lot of young children that frolic in the pond, and I wasn't exactly sure what was going on there. So I appreciate the attention. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we're going to end the meeting. Thanks again for participating.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Bob. Say goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye to all.